Good evening. The title of my presentation will be the Vegetation Ecology in serpentine areas. Serpentine areas are special cases of arid areas, and we will see all the causes that make these areas very interesting. The serpentine substrates, although represent only less than 1% of the Earth's land surface, they are very important in terms of economy and biodiversity. What is special about serpentine substrates? They host a very unusual flora and vegetation. And also they have another characteristic, they are very infertile. Here in the picture we can see a grassland. The left part of the picture, we can see that a species with yellow flowers dominates, and in this area we have serpentine substrate, while in this area we have a change in the substrate. The substrate becomes sandstone, and we can see that there is a very abrupt change of vegetation. For instance, we can see that there is no individuals, almost, of this species with the yellow flowers, which is Lastenia californica. So in serpentine areas, we have very steep gradients of floristic differentiation and ecological differentiation. Let's start with some definitions. Serpentine is the rock composed mainly from three minerals: anticorite, chrysotile, and lizardite minerals, which has this chemical formula. Ultramafic rocks, on the other hand, are the rocks containing high concentration of magnesium and iron, and specifically they contain more than 70% of these mafic minerals. Ultrabasic rocks are just the rocks having less than 45% of silica. And ophiolite is a term that it was used initially to describe serpentine rocks, but later this term modified to include also ultramafic rock assemblages. Although it is more right to use the term ultramafic rocks, in bibliography the term serpentine rocks, serpentine vegetation, serpentine plants prevails, so we will use this terminology in the presentation. This is a serpentine rock. We can recognize serpentine rocks from their dark color. Also, they have patches of green color. And when we touch this rock, it feels like we're touching soap. It's slippery. The surface is slippery. There are, of course, other types of serpentine rocks. This is a chromatite, which can be distinguished from the black spots it has, chromatite, and an olivine chromatite from Cyprus, from Troodos mountain in Cyprus. Now, let's see how serpentine rocks are formed. Serpentinization is a process that involves the conversion of peridotite. Peridotite is very rich, it is found in the Earth's mantle, and it is transformed into serpentine mainly by hydration of the primary igneous minerals. This metamorphosis takes place at the seabed at a relatively low temperature, from 100 to 300 Celsius degrees, high pressures, and pH over 10. So here in this figure you can see that the peridotite goes out from this magma chamber under the sea, and here is the formation of the ultramafic stones, the serpentine stones. So, serpentine rocks represent fragments of oceanic crust and mantle, and they are formed at the mid-oceanic ridges in these areas. However, because of the orogenesis, these serpentine rocks are exposed at the Earth's surface along orogenic belts, like this situation in Southeast Europe. Serpentine rocks have some special characteristics. And these characteristics are the cause of the special flora and vegetation on these substrates. The characteristics of serpentine rocks is the high concentration of siderophile elements such as cobalt, chromium, iron, and nickel. And from the other hand, they have very low concentrations in nutrients such as calcium, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The serpentine rocks at the Earth's surface withstand in the withering in dry climates, but in wet climates they are chemically withered and give smectite, which is a clay mineral, which is rich in iron and talc. Different types, of course, of soils can be produced on serpentine substrates because except the substrate, the parent material, soil formation depends also on other factors such as climate, relief, organisms, and time. And this is the Clort equation of soil formation factors, which have these four factors and the parent material as well. Now, the soils all over the world made from serpentine have some common characteristics. And these common characteristics are partly because of the nature of the substrate of the rocks from which these soils are formed. One characteristic is the high concentration of siderophile elements such as nickel, chromium, cobalt, and iron. Another characteristic is the low concentration of nutrients such as nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. A third characteristic of the chemical properties of the soil is their low productivity. In general, they are very infertile soils. A fourth characteristic is the low ratio of calcium to magnesium, which is very low in comparison with non-serpentine soils. Finally, the fifth characteristic is the low percentage of clay and the low calcium exchange capacity of clay. Serpentine soils have also some physical properties, characteristic. One characteristic physical property is the high soil porosity and permeability, which makes a favorable environment for roots aeration. Another characteristic is the dark soil of the soil, which is not because of organic matter, of high content of organic matter in the soil, but because of the serpentine rocks from which these soils are formed. And this dark soil causes extreme temperatures and a wide range of diurnal temperature fluctuations. So it makes a not very nice environment for the plant growth. Another and most important characteristic of these soils is the high rate of soil drainage. Generally, these soils have very coarse texture and high porosity. And this high rate of soil drainage reduces the soil water holding capacity. This soil, in general, suffers from drought. So this is a very important characteristic.
However, probably this is also related to the low productivity of the soils.
Yes, there is a cycle, actually. Yes, because we have low input of organic matter in the soil, so they have even less water holding capacity. From 16th century, it was noticed the unusual flora and vegetation in these soils. And the first studies, researches made for serpentine vegetation and flora was about South and Southeast Europe, and especially Balkans. One typical example of such a serpentine work is the work of Margraf in 1932. However, after some studies made about the flora of these areas, the emphasis switched to the discovery of the causes of the exceptional infertility of these serpentine soils. So we can find in bibliography the term serpentine factor, which is the factor or combination of factors related to the infertility of these soils as well as the nature of the vegetation colonizing them. And in bibliography we can see also some other terms, synonyms of serpentine factor. These are serpentine problem or serpentine syndrome. The study of the factors of the components of this serpentine factor is a very attractive research question, and there are several hypotheses about which which components comprise this serpentine factor. There are four well-formed hypotheses about the serpentine factor. One is the toxicity effects of the heavy metals of nickel, chromium, and cobalt. The other is the the low ratio of calcium to magnesium. A third hypothesis concerned the low levels of plant nutrients, and a final hypothesis concerned the well-drained character of the soil and the extreme temperature occurring in them, factors that are related with the physical properties of the soil and causing actually water deficiency in these soils. So we can group these factors to two major categories: the chemical properties, that is, factors that are related with the chemical properties, and these are the three first factors, and the physical properties, the fourth hypothesis. And there were studies in the past that was focusing just on one factor, trying to research to investigate if this factor is important, or to the combination of factors creating this serpentine problem. Let's see this hypothesis and this factor, how much important are in the serpentine problem. Firstly, I must note that the average pH of serpentine soil is about 6.8, and the availability of the siderophile elements in this pH range differs. So, cobalt is the most abundant. It's the most soluble heavy metal in the soil, in this pH, followed by nickel, then chromium, and then iron. However, the ability of plants to accumulate and to be affected by these elements does not depend only to their concentration in the soil and their availability in the soil, but also on other factors. Nickel, the first heavy metal that may be responsible for the toxicity effect in serpentine soil. It is one of the most important factors that have been studied as a component of serpentine factor. And the things that indicate that nickel plays an important role is that the nickel content of plants growing on non-serpentine soils is in the range of 0.1 to 5 micrograms per gram in dry matter, while plants growing on serpentine present a nickel content from 20 to 100 micrograms per gram. There are also some other plants, and these plants in this diagram, in this figure is these plants, which can tolerate much more nickel concentration. For instance, they can concentrate about 10,000 micrograms per gram, that is 1% of their dry weight. And these plants are called hyperaccumulators. We will see these plants later on. One good example of a hyperaccumulator is this plant, which is Serpentine acuminata. It is a plant found in New Caledonia. It is the plant having the highest nickel concentration ever recorded in the living material. Actually, this plant in its latex has nickel content about 26 on a dry weight basis and about 11 on a wet weight basis. And the ability of this plant to hyperaccumulate nickel in so large amount was considered to be an elemental allelopathy that this plant creates. Specifically, this plant concentrates a lot of nickel in their leaves. The leaves are falling down to the ground. They form litter, and the litter is very rich in nickel, so other plants cannot grow in this litter, on this litter, so we have a competitive advantage for this species against the other species. Although there are contradictory results in bibliography, nickel is considered one of the main components of the serpentine factor. However, whether or not nickel will have toxic effect on plants depends on soil pH. For instance, adding lime in the soil decreases the availability of nickel. The percentage of organic matter, when we have higher organic matter content in the soil, the nickel toxicity is decreased because some organometallic complexes are created, and the concentration of the soil in plant nutrients. Let's go to the second heavy metal found in serpentine soil. This is chromium. Chromium content on non-serpentine soil is about 100 micrograms per gram, while on serpentine soil it's about 5,000 micrograms per gram. However, chromium concentration in plant available forms are extremely low, and serpentine plants do not have chromium content more than 100 micrograms per gram. Also, no hyperaccumulator of chromium has been found in the world. So there is no evidence that chromium is a very important factor in the serpentine problem. The third heavy metal in these soils is cobalt, which cobalt content in non-serpentine soil is about 20 micrograms per gram, while in serpentine soil it is about 500 micrograms per gram. Cobalt, if you remember a previous figure I saw, is very high available in the pH range of serpentine soils, and some plants can contain large amounts of cobalt, like 500 micrograms per gram on serpentine soils, while this amount on non-serpentine soil is only 1 microgram per gram. And some hyperaccumulators of cobalt, that is plants with cobalt content higher than 1,000 micrograms per gram in dry material, can be found, about 30 species. So it is a low number, and we can suppose that cobalt, although plays some role in the serpentine factor, this role is not very significant. Okay, so from the three heavy metals, nickel is the most possible factor comprising this serpentine problem. We're going now to the other chemical property, the second chemical property of serpentine soils, which is the low calcium to magnesium ratio. And this ratio is considered that affects very much serpentine flora and serpentine vegetation. And there are three ways that this ratio can affect plants. One way is the toxicity of magnesium itself. The other is the deficiency of calcium. And the third way is just the unfavorable ratio of calcium to magnesium. About the magnesium content, magnesium has really some toxicity effects on plants, but not because of the metal itself, but more because of the antagonism with the other elements. Calcium, on the other hand, is very low in serpentine soils, but in fertility it's not believed that it is caused by the low calcium content, but more from the low calcium to magnesium ratio. Serpentophytes, we know that are adapted to low calcium levels in soils, and several experimental studies showed that addition of calcium in serpentine soils increases significantly their fertility. Here we can see a figure. These are the calcium to magnesium ratio in serpentine soil, and here it is this ratio on non-serpentine soils. We can see that the ratio in serpentine soil is very frequently lower than the unity, lower than 1, while in non-serpentine soils this ratio is above 1 and mainly above 5. So this is a very obvious differentiation in the chemical properties between serpentines and non-serpentine soils. Now, about the third chemical property of these soils, the nutrient deficiency. We know that nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are particularly low in serpentine soils, and this low concentration in soils is reflected also in the concentration within the plants, within the plant tissues. Also, we know that fertilization of serpentine soils increase their fertility, increases the biomass of the plants growing on serpentine. However, there are soils which are more poorer in nutrients than serpentine soils. And also, many of the deficient symptoms of these nutrients in the plants may be due to the restriction of the nutrients uptake from the other ions, and not because they have just low concentration in the soil. And we know also that serpentine-tolerant plants, some serpentine-tolerant plants, do not show always higher growth if we put nutrients in the soil. However, in most experimental studies about fertilization of serpentine soils, it is clear that there is a significant increase of biomass when we add nutrients in the soils. And here in this experiment, when we add nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and calcium, we have the largest increase of biomass in comparison with the control case. In Tuscan area in Italy, Tuscan area is northwest Italy, is very famous about the serpentine areas that it has, and also about the serpentinophytes that it hosts. And a colleague, Hierucci Alessandro, has made a lot of studies in the serpentine areas in this part of Italy. His major conclusions about which is the main factor of serpentine problem is that he noticed that exchangeable fraction of soil metals was higher under more evolved and structured communities, other communities with higher biomass, in both natural and anthropogenic environments. Here from the CCA diagram, canonical ordination analysis, canonical correspondence analysis that he presents, we can see that the longest arrows are about rockiness of soil, stoniness, altitude, and pH. So he have found that the most important factors controlling vegetation appear to be drought stress due to topographic position, and not other factors such nickel content, sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. However, he found also that nutrient availability is also another important factor. So he concluded that water stress, together with soil nutritional deficiency, are the factors limiting the vegetation development in these soils, in all the areas of Tuscan in Italy. I tried before a few years also to study the factors comprising the serpentine problem, and I made this together with some colleagues in the area of Mount Vermio, actually in 3 sub-areas on Mount Vermio. This is the DCA, determined correspondence analysis diagram that we made, and in this DCA diagram we can see that there is a very clear discrimination of sampling plots and the 4 communities that have been distinguished. And the first axis in this DCA diagram, this axis, represents difference in soil conditions and disturbance regimes, while the second axis reflects mainly soil texture and nutrient content. Also, from the very good discrimination we can see in this diagram, I must note that in serpentine areas we have very steep gradients of floristic and ecological differentiation. So we have a very good differentiation of vegetation because substrate most of the times are responsible for this differentiation, and substrate can change in the area of few meters. And here there are the explanatory variables we have used, passively projected in the space of the first 2 DCA axes. And from this diagram, we can see that factors such as longitude of the sampling plots, clay percentage of soil, magnesium content, bare soil, and sand percentage of the soil are the main factors. These factors having the longest arrows and catching the most variance of the vegetation, while factors such as nickel, chromium, and the ratio of magnesium to calcium is not so much important. This is a table from a canonical correspondence analysis we made, and here we can see the variance explains the variance of vegetation differentiation explained by each factor in the CCA analysis. And we can see that the first factor explaining the highest percentage of variance is the longitude. Then comes clay, altitude, zinc, then magnesium to calcium, although it explains a low percent of variance. It is responsible, uniquely responsible for this percentage. That's why we found in CCA as a significant variable magnesium to calcium ratio. And then we have sodium and sand percentage in the soil. And our conclusions are that the main gradients responsible for vegetation differentiation is disturbances, the most important, then soil texture, then altitude and climatic differentiation, and then the nutrients. However, we wanted to proceed one step further, so we made a variation partitioning. Actually, we tried to find the unique percentage of variance that can be attributed to 4 categories of variables. And these 4 categories are nutrients, physiography, coordinates, and heavy metals. I must say that coordinates have been used in the analysis because they are catching some differentiation that was not described by the explanatory variables we have used. For instance, coordinates may represent disturbance regimes, grazing, and other things. Okay, and we can see from this Venn diagram that the most important category of factors are the nutrients, followed closely by physiography, and then followed by coordinates and metals. Our hypothesis we have built from our study is that the soil conditions of the most evolved assemblages in the area affect in a combined way soil, water, and nutrients availability. Specifically, as the soil is moister in this assemblage, in the more evolved assemblage, plant growth is stimulated. This stimulation increases the deposition of dead organic matter and the organic content in the soil, thus improves soil water holding capacity. The wetter condition, because of this reason, as well as the humus decay, causes soil acidification. And this acidification provides a bigger, together with the higher organic matter in the soil, provides a bigger nutrients pool in the soil because we have more input of nutrients in the soil by the organic matter from the one hand, and from the other hand we have also a decreased pH, that means more available nutrients for the plants. So, our main conclusion is that not one factor, but a combination of factors is responsible for the vegetation differentiation. Nutrients and physiographic variables are chiefly responsible for this vegetation differentiation. However, the other two groups, the coordinates representing disturbance regimes and other things like this, as well as concentration of metal, are responsible for a notable proportion of explained variance, but lower than nutrients and physiography. So, conclusively, we can say about the serpentine factor that there is no single factor that is responsible for this infertility in this soil and for the special flora and vegetation in these soils. However, in most cases and in most studies, chromium and cobalt content was found to have little or no effect to the plants in the serpentine areas. On the other hand, infertility because of nutrients may arise not because of nutrients low concentration in the soil, but from their antagonism to their uptake by other elements. And nickel toxicity is also a probable source of some or much of the toxicity in these soils. And also important has been found in many studies the low calcium to magnesium ratio. Finally, the physical properties, and specifically dark soil and coarse soil texture, plays in some cases, and especially in the Mediterranean area, a very important role affecting soil moisture and indirectly other factors, such as nutrients availability. So these are the factors which may consider components of the serpentine problem. And to my little experience on serpentines, I can say that there are areas where one factor prevails, while in other areas, other factors play the determinant role. Okay, this is plant ecology. Now we will go on another aspect of serpentine areas, which concern the plant evolution in serpentine areas. In general, serpentine areas host two categories of species. One category is the facultative serpentinophytes, and these are taxa that grows quite well on serpentine. They can deal with the serpentine environment. However, they seem not to have the need of specific requirement from these soils. The other category are the obligate serpentinophytes, and these are taxa probably having a specific nutritional or other requirement from this kind of soils. And facultative serpentinophytes, we can distinguish them because they grow on serpentine soil, but they can be found also on non-serpentine soils, on normal soils. On the other hand, obligate serpentinophytes are rarely widespread and they confine more or less on serpentine areas. And this is the reason why we call the first category facultative, because we can find them also outside serpentine areas, and the other obligate. And serpentine soils in bibliography, you can see that it is a very important type of soil because it hosts spectacular levels of plant endemism. We have a lot of endemic species in serpentine areas. The evolution of plants in serpentine areas may start with these two steps. Firstly, a strong selection of serpentine leads to the formation of certain ecotypes of plants, of adapted population of a plant species, which is differentiated gradually from of the other population of the same species and comprise an ecotype. And we can see in serpentine areas that plants that can succeed growing in these areas have some special traits. One trait is their low specific leaf area. Another trait is their low growth rate, perenniality, and cellular mechanism for regulation of calcium, magnesium, and other heavy metals. If we will have reproductive isolation of this population, that these soil ecotypes may be a stage in progression towards a serpentine endemic species. So we have with these steps the differentiation of population of a species and actually a speciation mechanism on serpentine soils. But this is half the truth. Actually, endemic serpentinophytes belongs to these two categories of endemic species. One category is the neo-endemic species. Neo-endemic species are species that have recently been formed and are confined to a certain region and derived from a neighboring non-serpentinophyte. And these species have taxonomic relatives in close distance. So are species that have recently been differentiated for the neighboring relatives. These are neo-endemics. On the other hand, paleoendemics are taxa with a widespread, which are widespread, but have a highly fragmented distribution. And these taxa are confined to islands of serpentine soils. We cannot find them outside of serpentine soils. These taxa in the past were much more widespread, but environmental change have caused a change in their competitive ability. So these taxa are confined now to only to serpentine areas. And the characteristic of these taxa of paleoendemics is that they do not have taxonomic relatives in very distant, in very close region. Actually, they have taxonomic relatives in very distant regions and may be unique representatives of the genus and may be relict species. So we have two types of endemics, the neo-endemics and paleoendemics. However, some experiments showed that serpentine plants do better on non-serpentine soils than on serpentine soils. A picture from a paper is this. This panel is filled with serpentine soil, and we can see that this plant, Achillea borealis, grows very shortly in this panel, while in this panel, where we have non-serpentine, normal soil, we can see a much higher growth of the serpentinophyte Achillea borealis. So serpentine plants do better in non-serpentine soils. Why then serpentine adapted plants are found only on serpentine soils and not on non-serpentine soils? The answer is this, that in many cases the growth of endemic plants on serpentine is not related to some specific nutritional requirement, but it is related to their freedom from competition and other biotic hazards, like pathogens. So serpentine soils may be viewed as a refugee from competition and other biotic factors, rather than a source of unique resources. Sorry. Okay. I would like to make just a break of 5 minutes in order to not be sleepy. But this is the final slide before the break. So another important factor for the endemism in serpentine areas is time, is a factor of time. These are numbers of serpentinophytes, endemic serpentinophytes, in different places of the world. In California, we have 215 taxa. In Cuba, more than 800 taxa. In New Caledonia, more than 1,000 endemic taxa. And in the Balkan Peninsula, about 126 taxa. In general, in areas that have been covered by glaciers in the past, we cannot find endemic serpentinophytes. Or we can find just some endemic subspecies, not species. In general, areas where their flora had more time to evolve, have not disturbed from glaciers, from other environmental changes, more endemic serpentinophytes exist in these areas. And more from the endemics are paleoendemics than neo-endemics. And in these areas, also there is a higher spatial differentiation in the serpentine flora and the existence of more specialist species, species confined to certain, for instance, serpentine islands. So, one thing that I want to remember from this lecture is that serpentine soils are a model system for the study of species evolution, ecology, and conservation. And we will continue after the break with a special and very important type of serpentinophytes, the hyperaccumulators. But let's take a 5-minute break. Elements to extraordinary high concentration in their living biomass. We can distinguish these four types of plant species as far as their response to the serpentine soils is concerned. First, we have the normal plants. We have this kind of response in normal plants. Normal plants can tolerate low concentrations of metals in the soil, and in very low comparative concentration, they just die. They cannot survive. The other category is the excluder. The excluder plants. Excluders can grow over a wide range of metal concentration in the soil, of available metal concentration in the soil, and they have mechanisms to exclude the metals from their biomass. However, if a threshold is reached, then these mechanisms cannot control the uptake of metals, and the plant species die. The third category are the bioindicators. Bioindicators can take large amounts of metal in their biomass, but not very large amounts. And the concentration of metals in their tissues reflect the concentration of metals in the soil. That's why we call them bioindicators. However, if also here a threshold is reached, this dotted line is the threshold, the plant cannot withstand the serpentine environment, and we have its death. Finally, we have the hyperaccumulators, which are plants that can withstand much higher concentration than all the other plants. They have this type of response to the availability of metals in the soil. So we can see that they can have large amounts of metals in their tissues. And these plants have some special mechanisms to withstand these high concentrations of metals. And this dotted line, as I said before, is the threshold of hyperaccumulators. So plants that can contain heavy metals in their tissues above this threshold, they are called hyperaccumulators. While all the other plants, even they can grow in serpentine soils, some of them, such bioindicators and excluders, they cannot exceed this threshold of metal content in their tissues. Now, the nickel hyperaccumulators are species that can be found, for instance, all their population are found in serpentine areas, and all their population hyperaccumulate. and these species are called obligate hyperaccumulators. But there are also species that only part of their populations has this property to hyperaccumulate nickel. These species are called facultative hyperaccumulators. It is important to say also some notes I found in bibliography that some hyperaccumulators can absorb metals in high amounts even from soils with low metal concentrations. So they have the tendency to absorb a lot of metals in their tissues, regardless of the concentration of the metals in the soil. In order to characterize a plant as a hyperaccumulator, we have to find having these concentrations, high concentrations of nickel in natural habitats, because there are a lot of experiments of hydroponic cultures of plants. We don't want these cases. We want only cases in natural habitats. And the hyperaccumulation status should be determined on the basis of metal content in the leaves, not other organs, because in roots we have larger amounts but immobile amounts of heavy metals. In total, all over the world, we have up to 2013 from a paper, we have 500 plant taxa that can be found as hyperaccumulators of different elements. For nickel, the number is 450. For copper is 32, for cobalt 30, selenium 20, and here the numbers are going lower. So we see that most of the plants found hyperaccumulating, 450 from the 500 plant taxa are hyperaccumulating nickel. The answer why nickel is so often found as hyperaccumulated in plants is that nickel-rich soils have much higher area than those of the other metals. A lot of metals are available only in ores, in mines, and not in natural environments. There are 7 areas where nickel hyperaccumulators were found. One area is North California, the other is Cuba. A third important area is South Europe and Anatolia, Zimbabwe, Southeast Asia, Western Australia, and New Caledonia. These are the areas with hosting hyperaccumulators of nickel. The genus with the highest number of nickel hyperaccumulators is the genus Alyssum. This is Alyssum genus, and this is Alyssum murale. This is a member of the Brassicaceae family. And here we see Alyssum murale with the characteristics siliquas of the Brassicaceae family. This is the distribution of Alyssum, which exists in South Europe and Anatolia. And it is found that the area of distribution of Alyssum species is negatively related with the nickel content of the hyperaccumulators. Specifically from the 18 species of Alyssum genus that containing more than 10,000 micrograms, high amounts of nickel, in their tissues, in their dry leaves, only one has a wide distribution. And Alyssum species containing from 1,000 to 500 micrograms per gram of nickel in their leaves are more widespread. And also there are a lot of cases of plant communities where Alyssum species prevail and dominate in cover in these communities. A fact that shows the adaptation of these species to serpentine soils. Here is such a case. All the yellow, the plants with the yellow flowers are Alyssum murale. Another important genus with hyperaccumulators in Europe is the genus Thlaspi, which has been divided also, some species have classified in the genus Nokia. These hyperaccumulators have as distribution center our country, Greece, and 7 hyperaccumulators have been found in Greece, according to Brooks. And it has been found also that plant species that hyperaccumulate nickel can have also the ability to hyperaccumulate zinc. This is a characteristic example of such a plant of Central Europe. It's Thlaspi calaminare. Now the name is Nokia caerulescens, which it has been named as calaminare because it was found in the habitat that it is found. This species is calamine ores, zinc ores. There are some very interesting applications of hyperaccumulation. One is the phytoremediation. And phytoremediation is the use of plants to remove pollutants from contaminated soil and water. It's an environmental friendly and cost-effective technique. And actually plants are used for the uptake, translocation, sequestration, and degradation of pollutants. And then the plants are harvested and processed by drying, ashing, and composting. And another application, interesting, is phytomining, is to use plants to mine metals from the soil. This technique is used more in ore bodies where other techniques of mining are not conventional, are not appropriate methods. Now I would like to turn my presentation to our area and to see the distribution of serpentine flora in the Balkan Peninsula. Balkan Peninsula have the largest areas of serpentine soil, and it has a very interesting and specialized flora. It hosts a very interesting and specialized flora. These are the serpentine with the black color areas in Balkan Peninsula, and the most significant areas, largest areas, are in central Bosnia, in western central Serbia, in north central and southeast Albania, in northwest and central Greece. The serpentine areas in the Balkans are considered a center of floristic differentiation and speciation. The total number of endemics in the Balkans is estimated about 2,200 species. The number of Balkan endemics growing on serpentine is about 335 species. The number of obligate serpentine endemic plants are about 123 species, that is 6% of the total endemic flora of the Balkans, which is a large number. The features which are responsible for the distribution and the abundance of these obligate serpentinophytes in the Balkans are edaphic isolation, mountain island isolation, serpentine areas which act biogeographically as islands in the mountains, island isolation, this is the case of Evia, which has some interesting serpentine areas, and the continuous long-term isolation of the serpentine areas in the Balkan Peninsula without interruption or disturbance of the speciation process. The serpentine endemic flora of the Balkans is very rich in paleoendemics, and this is a table of paleoendemic species, and we can see the most interesting results of paleoendemics. One is a monotypic genus, Leptoplax. It has only one species, the genus Leptoplax, the Leptoplax emarginata, which is a brassicaceae and is confined in this area, in Greece, in different floristic regions of Greece. Another very good example is the species Halaxia satoneri, also one species only in this genus, which is These species are related with the ancient genus of Molkia, which is found in Anatolia and Iran. Halaxia is a Boraginaceae, a member of Boraginaceae family, and it is confined in Bosnia-Herzegovina and in Albania and Serbia. And the final example is the species Paramolkia doelfleri, also one species in the genus, also related with the ancient genus Molkia. And this is also a Boraginaceae, and it is confined in Albania and Serbia, in this area. It has a more strict distribution area. The floristic composition of the Balkans indicates that the evolution and speciation process has started from the Tertiary. So it has a lot of Tertiary relict species. And this is indicated from the highly differentiated taxa and the rank of genera. It has endemic genus as endemic taxa. It has also some species that are isolated within the sections in the genera, all within the genus, and some isolated sections within the genera. And the flora, the endemic flora of serpentine areas from the Balkan, it has floristic affinities with an ancient Mediterranean, sub-Mediterranean flora. I apologize, I put in the end of the slide the bibliography of all these slides, but it is not,
However,
we cannot see.
All the presentations will be distributed among
Okay,
the
so in
you
the,
have the
yes, you will find the citation of, from all this information came from. Specifically what is done by Stefanovic and other colleagues is that they try to find the horotype, the horological type of the endemic species relatives. And they found that most of the relatives of the serpentine endemics are Mediterranean species, about 30%, or South European mountainous species, about 35%. So most of the serpentine endemics have evolved from Mediterranean or South European species. Concerning the substrate preference of the relatives of serpentine endemics, they have found that most of them, about 62%, they grow predominantly or absolutely on calcareous substrates. So the serpentine endemics have evolved from calciphilous species. Concerning the size of the distribution area of Balkan endemics, there are different categories. There are the transregional endemic species, and we call transregional endemic species the ones that are distributed in different floristic regions in the Balkans. Floristic region is an area differentiated by its flora, and this differentiation is caused by differences in macroclimate and barriers in the species migration. So these species succeeded to pass these barriers and to have a distribution area in different floristic regions. Another category is the regional endemic species, which are confined in one only floristic region, as is the case of Silene schwarzenbergeri, which is confined in floristic region of North Pindus. And there are a lot, 69 actually, local endemic species. These local endemic species are confined, have a distribution area only in one mountain, not in other mountains. We can see some examples of these species, growing only in few localities. Concerning the species richness of the endemic flora of the Balkan Peninsula, the most important area was found in the North Pindus floristic regions, having this number of endemic species, The next in importance is the area of Albania and southwest Serbia, followed by the Mount Vurinos, which is an island because it's a serpentine mountain, which is around it there are plains. Isolated, yeah. We have also central Serbia with a high number of endemic species. And finally, the island of Evia, which has a lot of neo-endemic species. Finally, these are the final conclusion of the work of Stefanovic and colleagues, and that the main factors forming the endemic serpentinophytes of the Balkans is edaphic and mountain or island isolation. And that the serpentine areas in Balkans are very important because they are areas of active speciation as well as areas, refugial areas for paleoendemic species. And now we will see some characteristics of the plant communities of the vegetation types growing on serpentine. Vegetation growing on serpentine has these general characteristics. For instance, it has low species richness and abundance. We have predominance of herbaceous or scrub vegetation on serpentine soils. And in general, the vegetation of these soils has a very simple structure. We don't have, for instance, a lot of vegetation types with a tree layer. We have the dominance of very few species, the serpentine habitats, and also something peculiar for the floristic composition of this vegetation type is the co-occurrence of both acidophilous and bacillus species. However, a lot of different vegetation types have been recorded on serpentine areas, and these are vegetation types recorded in Greece on serpentine areas. For instance, we have hasmophytic vegetation on rocky slopes. This is a picture of hasmophytic vegetation. Xeric grasslands, rocky grasslands. Phryganic vegetation. We have here the phryganic species Chistus albifolius. Scrubs dominate mainly from Juniperus species. Subalpine grassland of the order, the class Daphno-Festucetea, but also forest vegetation. Pinus nigra forests are very characteristic of serpentine areas. They form very nice stands in the Pindus mountain range on serpentine areas. Pinus heldraichi also it is found on serpentine soils, as well as Pinus brutia subspecies halepensis. We can find also Quercus pubescens or Quercus phryneto forests on serpentine soils, and even, it is not, you cannot see here, Fagus sylvatica forest. So, the secret of what kind of vegetation is the soil depth. Here's an example from the PhD thesis of my friend Beckmeyer Erwin, and he showed us that the soil depth plays a determinant role. For instance, when the soil depth is large and the substrate is below from the roots of the plants, we can have Fagus sylvatica forests mixed with Abies borisii regis. When the soil becomes more shallow, we have this forest of Fagus sylvatica replaced by Pinus nigra forest together with Quercus pubescens. And in more shallow soils, we have Juniperus scrub, grasslands, and finally, in the most shallow soils, we can find hasmophytic vegetation. In fact, serpentine areas in the past may be covered by forest, but the serpentine soil has some characteristics, and these are the coarse soil texture that makes them very prone to soil erosion. Also, vegetation is evolved slowly in these areas, so the soil is not protected by forest vegetation. So if we have a disturbance in these soils, we have a lot of possibility to have soil erosion. And this is a picture of Mount Vurions that you can see a lot of areas with not vegetation, of bare areas, and a lot of erosion. If we search the phytosociological literature, we can see a lot of different vegetation types formed to describe the vegetation in serpentine areas. One of the most famous vegetation types is that of the order Hyperaccumulators septenneri. It is named under the species Hyperaccumulators septenneri, which is a paleodemic. And this order includes all the ultramafic and some siliceous rocky xeric grasslands of the submontane and supramontane belts of the continental region of the Balkan Peninsula. And this order is divided also in 3 alliances. Also in Greece, a professor that have worked in my laboratory have recognized another alliance, Allysia muralis, which is, however, is not accepted by other colleagues, and to include all the vegetation type in Greece growing in serpentine and dominated by Alyssum murale or Alyssum halkidicum, 2 characteristic Alyssum species of serpentine soils. Now, all the serpentine soils, and according to the phytosociology, are recognized with a set of diagnostic species. And these diagnostic species, in the case of serpentine vegetation, are either serpentinophytes, endemic species on serpentine soils, or alpine or subalpine species, or just ruderal species. So we have these 3 categories in the diagnostic list of species of the vegetation types on serpentine. All these 3 categories have one common characteristic. They all have very small competitive ability. So, we have seen it before, the small competitive ability of serpentine plants and their better development in normal soils, according to experiments, and not on serpentine soils, verifies that serpentinophytes find on serpentine soils a refugium for competition and from other biotic factors, like, for instance, fungal attacks. And another thing that is very interesting for me is the way that these communities are being assembled. There are 3 theories about the assemblage of species all over the world. One is the theory of competition, that some assemblages, species assemblages are formed through the competition process. The other is habitat filtering, and there is also a 3rd theory of neutrality, that assemblages are built according to the theory of neutrality on the basis of their dispersal ability and on the basis of stochastic events. In serpentine, I can hypothesize that species assemblages are formed under the habitat filtering process. And what is this process? Is that adverse environmental conditions act as a filter, allowing only species with appropriate adaptations to persist and leading in the communities to under-dispersion of trait values. That means that all the plants found in the communities on serpentine soils are accepted to have a very narrow list of traits, the traits that make them able to survive in such a harsh environment. Now, a final question is, should we conserve this serpentine problem, or we should solve this serpentine problem? We know that the fertility of serpentine soil can be improved by means of fertilization, for instance, the addition of calcium, or the development of vegetation of higher biomass. And this development of vegetation will add more organic content in the soil and will improve all the soil properties. actually in Tuscan area in Italy, the serpentine problem has been successfully faced through initially improvement of soil with fertilization and most usually with addition of calcium in the soil, and then through afforestation with pine plantations. The result of this improvement of soil was that the soil properties, chemical and physical, has been improved through mainly the accumulation of organic matter from the pine plantations. And a second positive effect of the pine plantation is the creation of a more favorable macroclimate. In Tuscan area, according to Alessandro Chiarucci, we have a lot of stress because of the drought. Having a tree layer, and this layer provides shade to the understory, so we have better microclimatic conditions for the plants in the understory. However, some other results of this treatment of serpentine soils was the invasion of more demanding and competitive species in the serpentine areas, species of the normal soils. And another result was the decrease or even the extinction of population of specialized serpentinophytes. So in areas that plantation were grown, we have no serpentinophytes. The serpentinophytes left the area because other more competitive plants invaded this area. And some efforts the last 3 decades to restore the serpentine vegetation in the area of plantation was possible only after removal of both the established vegetation layer, the pine plantation, as well as the topsoil. So, the proposal that we can find in the bibliography is, and it is also my proposal, that the conservation of serpentine areas should be a management priority against other purposes like timber or goods production, or even against protection from soil erosion. And the reason is simple, that because serpentine vegetation, serpentine areas are areas of active speciation, they are refugial areas of paleodemics, and they have all these unique biological and ecological processes and characteristics that we have seen. And now let's turn to the conclusions and to finish this presentation. The main conclusion of what I have shown to you is that serpentine substrates support a highly unusual flora and vegetation, and they are infertile. They are rich in siderophile elements and poor in nutrients, and they have low soil moisture. Concerning the serpentine factor, there is no single factor responsible for the infertility of serpentine soils, but rather a combination of factors. However, the most important factors found until now is nickel toxicity, low calcium to magnesium ratio, and soil moisture. Balkan Peninsula hosts a specialized and serpentine flora which is rich, very rich in relict species. Serpentine vegetation has low cover, simple structure, and low species richness, and a specialized floristic composition. Several different syntaxa vegetation types have been described for serpentine areas. And the serpentine vegetation is assembled by the habitat filtering process. And actually, serpentinophytes find on serpentine soil a refugium from competition and other biotic factors, and not some specific nutritional requirements. And finally, serpentine areas should be conserved because they have a specialized flora, vegetation, and some very characteristic and important biological and ecological processes. And this is the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for your patience.